What's up guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched. Now this week we're going to be doing a video on the psychology of Love Island, and we're going to be incorporating some elements of reality TV into this. Now this is something I've actually wanted to do for a number of weeks on the lead up to Love Island coming out, as I'm sure that many of you are watching. And I was really keen to kind of give a psychological interpretation of everything that's kind of attributed to Love Island. There's a lot of controversy around it, there's a lot of people that support it. And I really wanted to try and get in depth as much as I could with regards to the contestants, with regards to people that watch Love Island, and hopefully this week we can get a little bit more of a psychological appreciation of what Love Island is all about. So let's get straight into the video by starting off with a brief description of what exactly Love Island is. And I want to say this before I start any further. My objective here is definitely not to bash the show. I actually kind of watched the show. I've watched a number of the episodes. I haven't often watched the series in previous years, but I have watched some of them this year. And I want to make it clear that just because I'm talking about the psychology of Love Island doesn't mean necessarily I'm going all in on it and I'm attacking it. I want to try and get us to a point where we can appreciate what goes on in the show and around the show from a psychological perspective. But for those of you that don't know, Love Island is basically a show where people go to a kind of a villa in an island in Spain, and the objective is to couple up with somebody that they're attracted to. And fundamentally you have to be in a couple in order to stay on the show, and if you're eventually single or you can get voted out, then you're chucked off. All in all, it's basically just people living in a villa all together, and toward the end of the show, the winner who is in a couple will get £50,000. That's fundamentally the premise of the show. I'm not a TV producer, I don't pretend to be. But that's kind of like an overall view of what Love Island is really all about. Okay, so let's get into some of the nitty gritty. What exactly can psychology do for us with regards to understanding Love Island a little bit more? Well, it can do things like it can help us understand participants' motives. Are they really there for love? Are they there to progress a media profile, to be on TV? All of these kind of questions, psychology can help us, objectively speaking. That's not subjective. We can't pinpoint each individual and say this is what they're doing, why. But objectively speaking, psychology can at least help us appreciate a little bit more as to participants' motives for actually being on the show. Psychology can also help us in understanding why the show is actually so popular. It's one of the most popular shows in the UK right now. And psychology maybe can help us understand a little bit more about the audience of Love Island and understand a little bit more about where they're coming from and why they find the show so attractive. So let's take a little bit more of an in-depth look at this. What exactly can psychology tell us about the contestants on the show? Now, like I said, this is hard to do subjectively because people do this for their own reasons. The purpose of this video is to give that kind of overview, objective viewpoint and look at it from different angles as to the reasons why participants might take part in this show from a psychological perspective. Like I said earlier, the first thing that comes to my mind is the debate between actually finding love and trying to establish a media profile. What exactly are the motives behind the individuals that take part? Right off the bat, it's probably pretty easy to speculate that people are kind of there to establish a media profile. After a number of seasons of Love Island on ITV2, it's the case that people have established really prolific media profiles. They've done a lot of TV stuff, they've done a lot of personality stuff on television. So it's clear to say that if you do well on Love Island, then the likelihood is that you could establish a short-term career in media. I think there's also something to be said here about the fact that people can find love, I don't want to say anywhere, but in today's society, people find partners at work, they find them through friends, they find them on dating apps. To say that the only reason that you're going to an island that just so happens to be the most popular television television show on TV just to find a partner is a little bit speculative, I think. Now, psychology is super helpful in understanding Love Island a little bit more because it can actually help us understand participants' behaviours. When we've kind of got that backdrop understanding of, are participants there to find love? Are they there to establish a media profile? We can then start to use psychological principles or psychological understandings to start to develop an appreciation of different behaviours that the participants show. And for me, the first thing that kind of comes to mind is delayed gratification. And it makes me think a little bit about a really famous psychological study that was done a number of years ago, and it's called the marshmallow experiment. And it basically was where kids were put into a room and they were told that they could have one marshmallow now or they could have 2 marshmallows in 2 hours. 70 to 80% of participants ate the 1 marshmallow now, showing that they had issues with delayed gratification. Now, if you ever go on YouTube, Haribo did a really good television advert that was centered around the marshmallow experiment, where kids were struggling to give delayed gratification to eating a gummy bear or like a Haribo or something like that. It was a great advert. but it had a psychological study premise behind it. And I think delayed gratification is something evident in Love Island itself as well. Now, it's particularly evident through kind of emergency or panic recoupling. Now, you'll see this in different episodes as you go through. It's not uncommon for people to kind of panic recouple with somebody or try and panic establish a connection with somebody as soon as they have to recouple, or as soon as that kind of, when they've got to recouple and they're all sitting around the fire pit and things like that. It's not uncommon for people to start panicking and try to establish connections with people as quickly as they can, just in order to stay on the show. Now, why that's got to do with delayed gratification is because there's an immediate gratification there. There's something that they need right there and then. They're less willing to invest in a future and establish a stronger relationship with somebody. They're much more likely to try and get immediate gratification just to stay on the show. I think there's also something here to be said about jealousy and the fear of failure. Another thing that I've kind of noticed from watching a couple of episodes is that, again, it's not uncommon for people to get jealous of other individuals when they couple up with somebody. It's not uncommon for a number of people to become attracted to the people that are coupling up. Now, this says a lot about jealousy. It says a lot about perhaps about the fear of failure, where people are noticing that there's couples establishing, they're more likely to stay on the show. I'm single. The attraction for those individuals can build at times. Now, this of course is not always the case, but a fear of failure for somebody's position on the show, a fear that they might get chucked out, could give us a bit of an appreciation as to why that kind of process happens. And again, for me, it brings up the question, are people really there to find love, or are they there to establish a media profile? Are they there to be on television for as long as possible and establish a personality to an audience? Now, one of the most interesting psychological concepts that I think is evident on Love Island is the in-group versus out-group mentality. There's a lot of social identity theory evident on Love Island, I feel. I actually did a video a number of months ago on social identity theory. I'm going to put a link to that either up here or in the description below, and you'll be able to check that out to understand a little bit more about what I mean about social identity theory. But I think it's very, very evident in Love Island. Social identity theory, just to give you a bit of a backdrop, is all about acceptance within your group. It's all about your kind of group identity and your identity being established in the group of people that surround you. Now, this makes a lot of sense when it comes to Love Island. If an individual is revered and accepted and loved within the group in the villa, they're much more likely to actually find a partner. If people are disliked, if people are ostracized from that group identity, they're much less likely to find a partner, much less likely, and to the point where they'll get chucked off the villa. So the purpose of social identity theory is really important here, and actually establishing a role within a group, a role within that villa, is really important because it helps people establish partners. It helps people establish connections, and all of those things are vital for actually staying on the show. Now, the in-group versus out-group mentality is also extremely evident when new islanders enter the villa. If you've been watching the show, you'll know that when new islanders enter, there's an immediate panic, there's a fear, there's a concern of who these individuals are. And we can see elements of the social identity theory here. Again, if you've been watching the show, you'll know that one of the episodes happens where there's a separate villa where 10, 12 new islanders all go into that one villa. Social identity theory, the in-group versus out-group mentality, is more present there than ever. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail as to what that means. It's not uncommon for people in the main villa to attack the individuals that are in what's called Casa Amor, which is the separate villa there. Now, that in-group, out-group mentality is evident. As soon as that kind of group of islanders on the main island know that there's other islanders in another villa, there's that in-group, out-group mentality, there's that attack, there's almost that kind of battle, that war going on between the two of them. And there's a fear, an intimidation as to how this new group could impact the dynamics going on in the established group. Now, there's a lot of psychological literature and research to back this up. Psychologists have found that in order to establish a strong group identity, establish a strong social identity within your group, it's not enough to simply just maintain that group identity. One of the key features to establishing and developing social identity within your group is to hate and attack on other outgroups. Again, we're talking about this in-group, out-group thing. Now, you can see this with football teams. I'm personally from Glasgow, so maybe you know, and it may be applicable to your own city as well. In Glasgow, there's Rangers and there's Celtic. Now, if you're a Rangers fan, it's okay, it gets you far enough to say, I love Rangers, or I'm a huge Rangers fan. That'll get you to a certain point. But your social identity within your group is established even further if you talk about how much you hate the outgroup, in this case Celtic. Now, the exact same goes for Celtic fans. Again, I'm being very objective here. That's not always the case for absolutely every individual. But in order to establish and structure a stronger social identity within your group, it's not enough just to nurture that in-group mentality. You have to hate and attack the out-group as well. And we can see that evident in Love Island when we look at the main villa versus the kind of Casa Amor villa, or when new islanders enter the villa. It also establishes behaviours. Things like in participants' behaviours change because they're so concerned about new islanders entering. People want to establish and connect with their in-group even more. It's even evident in the animal kingdom. If you see that when you see like David Attenborough or something like that, you'll see chimpanzees grooming each other even more when they're concerned about out-groups and other chimpanzee groups that are about to attack them. They'll groom each other really rapidly. They'll do it last minute just to try and establish more of a connection with their in-group. It's almost evident, very similar in Love Island in itself, when partners might kiss their partner a little bit more. They might spend more time with their closer friends. They might talk about how much their group identity and how much their friendships and their partnerships mean to them, just because those out-groups are establishing and there's threat there. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to talk about the psychology of Love Island without talking about the potential threat to contestants, to even people watching these kind of shows, and that goes for reality TV in general as well. There are, of course, things to be considering for people watching the show now. I don't want to say that everybody watching the show is going to develop a mental health difficulty in any kind of way, but I think there is something to be said about how we perceive reality off the back of all these reality television shows. And we're in an age where it's Love Island right now. It used to be Big Brother. It was all kinds of other reality TV shows at one point or another. But I think we need to be concerned, we need to be considerate of how people watching the show actually view what reality is. You know, body dysmorphia, body image, what relationships mean, what sex means, what progress and success actually looks like, what investment means. All these kind of things are really important, because the way that things are discussed and talked about in Love Island often is not all that healthy. You talk about like things like sustaining a relationship. You know, they talk about in Love Island about sustaining a relationship when they've only really been together for 3 weeks. That sounds like a very small thing, but it speaks to some of the unhealthy behaviours and unhealthy attitudes that are evident in Love Island that viewers can adopt. I think there's also a massive risk to people actually taking part, and again, I wouldn't feel right in talking about the psychology of Love Island without actually discussing these things. Now, you probably don't need me to tell you that there have been a couple of suicides, and I don't want to say off the back of being on Love Island, but there were contestants, there's 2 in particular, who have taken their own life as a result of maybe some of the pressures that have come with being on such a successful television show. And I think, you know, it's been on the news a little bit more about the mental health provisions, the mental health influences and mental health practices and sessions that some participants receive and need to receive as a result of being on the show. These people go into these shows as pretty much nobodies, as in nobody knows who they are. They come out as some of the most famous people in the country. Now, what does that do to people's mental health? How do we actually protect those kind of individuals? Likewise, when people are actually on the show, I can imagine it's an extremely intense environment. There's cameras everywhere. You've got to make sure that you're establishing connections. You've got to look a certain way. That creates a lot of stress for people. So I think there's something really to be concerned about and aware of regarding the risk or the potential risk to people actually taking part in the show. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. I really hope you've enjoyed it. This is a video that I've been kind of trying to do for the past few months, thinking about how to construct that. I hope I've done it justice. It might even require me doing another video to look at some other concepts. I've tried my very best to look at the psychology of Love Island, to look at some of the behaviours that are evident there, some of the psychological theories or some psychological concepts that we can attribute to what goes on in Love Island. And I also think it's so important that we talk about the risk to viewers and the potential risk to participants as well. Again, I want to make sure that I'm clear. All of these points that I'm bringing up are not subjective. They're objective, and they're very generalistic and stereotypical in many, many ways. And people watching the show, like I've watched the show a lot this season as well, are not necessarily going to develop mental health disorders. Likewise, people who are on the show aren't going to either. But I think it's important that we highlight the risks, and I think it's important that we highlight how psychology can help us understand the show a little bit better. Guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched, and hopefully I'll catch you next week.